Hello, this is Dr. Mike, and this is for my CIS 2642 pen testing class, and this is a review of information gathering part 1, which is chapter 3, and we'll look at in the textbook what that covers. What it really covers right now is passive scanning, very passive. In fact, scanning might not be the right, even the correct word, but we will just mention some brief stuff about scanning. Part 2 is when we get more into more active scanning. So what's the difference between active and passive? I can guess passive will be possibly just think this way, me not using any tools on my IP address to gather information about my target. Using third-party tools, the OS, INT framework, Google, Shodan, and other type of stuff. We will just finish with some port scanning basics because we're going to go more advanced into part 2, which is topic 4. So again, and this is chapter 3 in the textbook at the time of this recording. This is the Pen Test Plus Study Guide. And we're doing really footprint enumeration section. So I'm not going to read the textbook to you, of course. Please review that on your time. We'll go over some slides that will cover most of this stuff here. But you can see the textbook is a good way to sort of get an idea about how to find certain information about your target. So before we jump into that, let's look at, of course, at our topics here. And really one of the biggest things is this is where you start learning to take notes. We have learning activities here you can look at. There's links here to, at least at the time of this recording, there's links to the OSINT framework, Send Your Own Lab Up, and some on Google Hacking, which actually is a really good one. We'll open that up for use. Yeah, that's a good one you look at too. So Google Hacking or Google Dorking, we'll talk about that in a little bit. I actually won't play that here. So probably one of the biggest ones though we want to look at here is really taking good notes. And this is something that it's going to evolve. It might change if you change apps. If you have different systems in play, maybe you're using a single laptop or desktop versus having maybe a dedicated laptop for running like scanning tools, for example, and using maybe a desktop or another laptop or some other thing, maybe for like chat, music, reference information. Also maybe have a secondary browser for browsing notes, things like that. You don't want to flood too much information on your work source. Now again, if you only have one system, that's what you have. But in any case, it could evolve. You may be using Google Docs, Dropbox, things like that, maybe to sync your notes. Very important you have a way to make sure your notes are backed up. You do not want to get 8 hours into a pen test and find out your app that uses your notes has crashed or is bad. And that still can happen. There's always a chance of maybe maybe the cloud system using goes down, things like that. But Google Docs is actually a good one. Just always be aware if you do collect information, you run across anything that has PII, or personal identifiable information, or it could be passwords, social security numbers, addresses of actual people. Be very aware of those. Maybe keep those off the cloud temporarily, and then maybe you can redact them as needed. But really the biggest thing is, of course, screenshots, things like that. So take good screenshots, take good notes, tool output, all-out tool output. If the tool generates any kind of report, maybe like, oh, wow, it's a Zap. As we go through this course, you'll see these tools have different outputs and reports. I dump reports for everything. Even if I don't plan to use the report later on, maybe in my final, maybe there's nothing there that's really of use, that actually could be handy. There could be information inside there that I might glean for further follow-up. And so, yeah, anything that can be outputted. So then Burp Suite will create an HTML report output. And we'll look at that later when we look at Burp Suite. HTML reports are great because they're easy to look at. You can open them in any browser. Of course, screenshots take up a little bit of space. And if you use it in, of course, a terminal, you can actually do things. You can dump your entire terminal. Depends on the terminal app you're using. If you're using something built into your system or a third-party tool, you can make that terminal app either just dump to a text file or just highlight, copy, and paste, and it's keep a running, note app, maybe a simple text editor, and just dump your notes inside there. Also, things you can, if you put your date time, Put down your IP address, where you're testing from. That's the first thing you should check. And it might be set up during your previous topic, which of course was contract. Your statement of work it might have in there that you'll need to report back your IP address. There's various ways to do that. IP chicken, you can use a IP address. What's my IP address? I have a little script I run in my terminal that puts it to a log file with a date time, so I know what it was at certain dates. Just various things like that. So I have a simple shell script. But you want to record your IP address early on, and this is from the system you're going to test from. Maybe you can test from home. And then check it again before you start testing, make sure it hasn't changed. And then record that IP address and put that into your notes. Also, what version of the tools you're using. Don't have to get too detailed. You don't have to get into maybe the operating system version, things like that. But if you're using, let's say, Burp Suite a lot, or Zap, or you find yourself using some Metasploit, whatever, maybe you can just dump that version out and put that into the notes, because if you come back to test again later and you have an updated version, there can be some changes that may affect further testing. So real important to take notes, and this is where you would start doing it. And it can be as simple as just copying URLs and then copying the output. So with that in play here, look at what the slide deck is talking about. Now, this is part one, and so this is only a few slides here. Again, probably the biggest thing, of course, is your search engines. Shodan, actually will demo that. Web searches, Google dorking. Google's going to be your friend here a lot. Public records, social media sites. If your engagement is red team based, where it's very much full-on attack, LinkedIn, Twitter, you need the basics, right? Facebook. If you don't have those, you want to create some shadow accounts for yourself to use. To at least go in and maybe search for information about these people. I say people because that is actually your target. It could be you want to target a certain person with a phishing attack and information that might help you create that attack, or even create a dictionary of possible passwords. So information you can gather from this, you can either dump information from these websites, print a PDF, things like that. And of course you can always go back. The thing about this passive reconnaissance is you can always go back and run the checks again without making any kind of noise. When we talk about active reconnaissance, especially when you get to very active scanning, it's best, especially if you're trying to lay low, if you're doing a full red team attack, to only do as much as possible as needed. So you run maybe an active scan against somebody, save that output, you don't have to run it again, you can go back and see all the details in case you want to go back and check something. But for passive, you can always go back and run these again. So maybe just copy and paste information that's of value, favorite, whether work history, favorite, stuff like that. So again, this is linked in here, but it's actually mentioned here too, right there. Who is OS and IT, and this actually is the framework here. So like if you're looking for email addresses, again, email searches, this will give you certain tools you can use. Again, it's possible some of these sites might not be operational. But this is just a good place you can start in case you're not sure where to start. Breach data is always a good one. Have they been pwned? Things like that. You can search for your target. Have they been pwned? That's actually a great one, because if you can show that they have, you might be able to find that information for follow-up attacks. Domain names, things like that. Okay, I'm not going to go through all this. This is the OS and IT framework. This is linked in the material, and it's also mentioned in the textbook. So you can see where this is a great place to go in and just really, I'm doing reconnaissance for myself. Like, what kind of tools can I look at? What kind of things do I need? Now, if I know I'm not doing any kind of social engineering attacks, then things like possible information from a person, like favorite movie, things like that, it's going to be, it's out of scope. No sense of even going on that road. But if it is, I know where I can at least go in and start looking. So first off, what do we look at for about our target? Well, probably one of the biggest ones is just go to your target's web page. And I'm using web pages because this is probably going to be a lot of your testing will be web-based, web app-based testing. It's a mobile app. There's always approach it. If it's an API, there's tools for that. But we'll use this for in this case. And really, there are simple tools. One, of course, is just look at the web page. Is there a help desk information, phone numbers, how to contact information, who to talk to? Is there a directory? And also, do I see things like this, a search box? This is something that I definitely myself will flag as, hey, I'm going to come back and check that later when I get more active, especially look for vulnerability scanning, because if I know a search might do have a good entry point for an injection. So yeah, this information about it. You don't have to go through the entire site. That can be very lengthy, and we'll look at that later when we look at web app-based testing. But there's tools you can get baked into your browser. And for example, I have this IP tool. And this is my DNSlytics. This is a Firefox-based tool. And you notice I'm switching between browsers here. You'll see this a lot. I actually keep one browser. In my case, Firefox is sort of an empty browser. I can clear out all history. Don't have any cookies. And I have a few tools I use, like this one, to get information about my target. And whereas I might use another browser for my own personal searches, and then maybe have a browser that's proxied into my tool, like maybe Zap or Burp Suite. Or actually Burp Suite has its own built-in tool now, its own built-in browser, which is really great. But in any case, think about that. You don't want to muddle search results and attempting to do a injection test or whatever. This is later on down the line. With the same browser you're running a scan on. You want to keep those separate if possible. So yeah, always have maybe another browser. It doesn't make a difference what it is. I like Firefox. There's a lot of good plugins here. And for example here, I can get the IP address. Even better, I can get the IP address in subnet. So go back to your basic CIDR subnetting. I can know a /20. I know how big the IP address range is. If I need to scan the entire range out, I know where to set my scanner to. So this is going to come back for Nmap. Now, of course, if I know the exact IP address, that's going to be nice. What I'm doing is I'm footprinting my target. How big is my target? And in the statement of my scope of work, if it's only a few IP addresses, then I have those already listed for me. I don't need to go and do this type of work. But if it's a full red team type of engagement, now I know here it's a /20 network. So I know how big of a target I'm dealing with. And I can just copy and paste this into my notes. And there's other stuff here too. There we have the who is information, which is mentioned. Who is pretty good. You might get information about the address. Now, of course, this is since this is a .org. But again, here we go. We have tech emails here and phone numbers. And if you are doing any kind of social engineering attack, right there's a good idea. Now I know what the email for my target looks like. It's first name last name as declared to edu. So if I need to build an attack, I can do that. If I want to try some logins. And of course, you can see information about certain people. So this information can be useful in a social engineering-based attack. But also, it allows me to, again, footprint enumeration. I can footprint on my target and see how emails are formatted. First dot last name. So, and I'm using this as a simple tool for this. So another tool you can use, we'll look at here is, of course, look at search engines. Before we do that, actually no, we'll go look at search engines. And before we do that, we'll talk about Shodan. That's mentioned in the textbook. In enumeration and footprinting, Shodan is mentioned in here, I believe. There's some minor tools and so on. And there's some great scenarios here to look at. Shodan. So you create a free account with Shodan, and you can do a search. Shodan is actually more of an IoT type of system. That's what's paid for. The idea is it scans for open ports and services for domain or IP address. However, I literally now just did a scan, and I use what some other company has done, some other third party has done. They've already scanned down Sinclair. I can see my ports are open, 443 and 80. So okay, that's actually good. There's nothing there. There's nothing that jumps out as like a telnet, for example. So again, but I've actually never touched my target with my actual IP address yet. I'm using third party for this. So it could be information here. Here's the IP address for the servers, and domain names, and so on. Information can be gathered. You can dump this to HTML, to a PDF, and so on. So again, I won't spend too much time on that. That's Shodan. It's a great tool. And before we talk about that, OS and IT, let's go back here. We're going to look at Google and something called Google Dorking, which is that mentioned here. Yeah. So we're going to actually focus on this. Electronic documents. Oops. Electronic documents. Image metadata. Information about a document itself. So you're like, okay, well, how can that be handy? So maybe if my target has a website and they have images up there, pull the images down, look at EXIF data. Could have information about what version of Photoshop they're running, if they've done any kind of Photoshop. It could be leading to, if it's a full red team attack. Maybe there's a third party that's used as a photographer, for example. I can leverage that photographer's information in a social engineering attack. So what looks for like will be very benign information, especially from a user, can be very handy in the hands of an attacker. So, but also you can search for stuff, certain sites to be open. So, for example, Google Dorking. I'm not going to get into that yet. In fact, there's probably a thing in the textbook about it. If not, look at Google Dorking. Actually, there is a link in the course material for this too. So, but one of the simple ones is this site. If I type correctly, site, and then, like for example, I'll look for any file that's a docx. Excuse me. So you can see here, I'm only looking at sinclair.edu. I'm looking at anything that has a docx on it. So here's developing modules for your class. Here's an mla.docx. Let's download that. You can open it. So again, what looks like, okay, this is really nothing here that's going to help me in an attack, but it could, because we look at Word, we look at the file properties. You might find information about who the user is. You might find information about what version of the app they're using. Sometimes it might even last saved by. So I have names now. 2 names here, so excuse me. And sometimes some documents might expose what version of software they're using. So if I know they're using Windows 10, maybe that somehow got imprinted into the EXIF data, or what version of a third-party app, and that app is behind. It could be a possible point for an attack. Also, you can use this for things like PHP. So here's a website developed PHP. Sometimes you can find PHP pages, like login.php. I won't try to find that here, but things like that. So Google Dorking is a great way for this. And there's tools you can look at in OSNT framework to get information about the documents. Man, excuse me. All right, so the last thing, of course, is technical data, DNS IP. We saw this already. Traceroute information. You can do that from your system. However, there's also ways to do that from a third party. So, example, this is a website called viewdns.info I use. And I can actually go ahead and port scan from here. So this is ViewDNS running a port scan against them. And we can see now we have certain things here. Open and close status. And this is what it's port scanned. I can do DNS reports, reverse IP lookups, who is, IP history. There's a trace route. Now, this is trace routing from, I believe, their system. And you might get very much from this. So, and so again, like I mentioned before, in my Zen pen testing, sometimes you run stuff, you don't get nothing. That's normal. So, in any case, there's a lot of tools here for this. But the big one is here, I can actually do a port scan for common ports. And again, this is sort of Shodan's done for me, but I can do it again from here. And again, I can copy that information and paste it into a document. And last thing, of course, is we talk about port scanning is Nmap. Now we're actually going to do a demo on Nmap separate, either in a separate video or part of the next topic. But support scanning basics here. Look at your Nmap document. Nmap, by the way, is a network mapper. It's probably going to be one of the premier tools you're going to use for a lot of your work. It can do everything from a basic port scan to more advanced port scanning. It can do things like you can try to do stealth scanning. You can you can masquerade as different IP addresses. And so there's ways maybe use this within from your IP address within still under the very passive side. Again, we have filtered, unfiltered, and so on. So this is a nice way. What does it mean when you get information back from a port scan? What does open versus closed mean? What's filtered mean? Probably the three you're going to see are those three: open, closed, and filtered. Filtered is going to tell me that there's a firewall in place. So that's at least some sort of web app filter in place, web app firewall. So anyways, Nmap's a fantastic tool. So last thing here, of course, and we're going to close Firefox here. Some of these tools, again, are going to be like this. You're going to see a very passive scanning and active scanning. So again, passive means there's really nothing from your IP address touching the target. Active, of course, can mean everything from just a simple web scan to very, very advanced hardcore vulnerability scanning. And a lot of times, a lot of tools are going to sit between this, like Nmap, for example. There's some ways you can do very passive, and some ways you can hit very active, actually. Nmap has vulnerability scanners built into it, CVE scanners, and everything in between. So Burp Suite might be more on the active side, but it has some stuff that could be sort of passive. Passive being, it's sort of as you touch the web page, for example, with Burp Suite, it will check what comes into your client. So it looks like a regular client's browsing it. So we're actually going to cover some of these other tools like Burp Suite when we talk about more of the active scanning. And or I'll do a separate video on this, on the tools themselves. So just keep that in mind when you're gathering your information. Again, as you find information, if you run anything across that says, hey, there are possible CVE, understand what CVE means. That's going to be one of the biggest things you want to use. If any passive scanner says there's a possible CVE, document that and go find the CVE and bookmark that CVE and put that in your notes. We'll actually do that later when we look at more of vulnerability scanning, because that's where you'll probably find this. So again, look for those organizations to help you out. OWASP also is one, and I'll come back to OWASP later when we look at more active scanning. So again, that really is it for sort of a passive look. This is going to be your best tool to start with. Start here, think about the scope of your work, think about what it involves, what kind of attacks you can build, and then start just look at your target. Simple. Start with, if it's a web page, look at the web page. If it's a mobile app, just start looking at the mobile app. Use it. If it's a, and this is also the time, if it's a gray box or if it's a white box test, you have documents to look at. Look at the documents. Make sure you keep a copy of them, and copy information out of the documents into your notes. Say, hey, they use this API version. They use this type of framework. Information that can help you later. Because it's in your notes, you'll see it first, and you might forget about it if you just leave it in the document. So copy stuff from the documents. Anyways, that wraps up our first look at information gathering part 1. And I hope this was very helpful. Thank you.